Welcome in to Husker Max today, February 13th, 2025. I am Kaleb Henry. That is Nick Handley. This is a show number 4 now. So we've really gotten rolling along, had a lot of fun every Monday and Thursday right here on the Husker Max YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss a live show, including when we do all of our other things. Nick Handley with his podcast, whenever we put out episodes of that. Tonight, Nebraska men's basketball. There will be an after Nebrasketball episode with myself and the I-80 Club and Jacob Bigelow joining us there as well. Baseball season is upon us. We'll get into that with Michael Bruntz near the end of the show. And we just got a change in guidance, or a rescindance of guidance. Title IX, revenue sharing. It's a deep topic, and we will do our best to kind of tackle a little bit of where that is, what that means for Nebraska athletics as we get into this, again, like it is every year, a whole new world when it comes to collegiate athletics. But, Nick, let's start with tonight. Nebraska men's basketball at home, riding a 4-game winning streak. Maryland has won 5 out of 6. Huskers without Berkay. Maryland with a pretty dominant big in Derek Queen, who Nebraska actually played well against the last time these two met in College Park. Maryland being one of the double play teams for the Huskers this year in the massive 18-team Big Ten. What are you looking at when you see this game tonight and the opportunity for Nebraska not to necessarily make themselves a lock in the Big Ten tournament, but to probably increase their odds greatly if they were to move to a 5-game winning streak right now?
Yeah, I think, well, the first thing I'm looking at, Kaleb, is how this game's officiated. And that's not trying to be sarcastic or trying to, cry over the spilled milk or anything like that with some of the calls that didn't go Nebraska's way that they were able to still overcome in that victory against Ohio State. This is when you're out with one of your premier big men, and what Bjorkton was able to do really leading up into that victory against Ohio State, playing at such a high level that all of a sudden you're down a big body against a very large front court. The one thing we know Nebraska's guards are able to do is they'll collapse down. They'll dig at the basketball. If they're able to do so, and even if there is maybe a little bit of contact, but for the most part, it's going unnoticed unless it's totally obvious. I like Nebraska's ability to adjust and throw some different things at Maryland, even without Berkay in there. But if this game is a little bit more touch foul driven that we've seen, not just in the Big Ten, but in college basketball, where it can get a little bit inconsistent when you're down, again, another guy like that, like with Berkay, we saw what happened in the Ohio State game when you had 3 guys that were in foul trouble at the end of the second half. Nebraska can ill afford that this time. If that is the case, as good as Bryce has been, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to overcome that type of foul trouble now with Berkay out for this game. So for me, how this game is officiated early on, especially Maryland's first handful of possessions and the way Nebraska defends, how aggressive they are, but also how the game is officiated, I think is going to be maybe one of the biggest factors in tonight's matchup.
Well, and that is such a good point right off the bat, because you should be getting a lot of Andrew Morgan and Braxton Mia. And the last time these two teams played, Braxton Mia played less than 4 minutes. You're probably going to need 10 to 15 from him tonight. Andrew Morgan played 24 minutes. You're probably going to need at least that, at least, and then probably get closer to 30 for him. But you bring up the officiating at Pinnacle Bank Arena. The last 2 days that I have been there, a Husker men's game and a Husker women's game. In the men's game, you're right. The other day, Nebraska got into a lot of foul trouble early, and it was just like, there's not necessarily home calls happening. The next day, Nebraska women's basketball against Iowa, and it was the opposite, Nick. It was the opposite to the point where I even posted on Twitter, Iowa fans have a reason to gripe about the officiating.
Yep.
Like it was so inconsistent that you did not understand how you could play defense, whether it was on the perimeter or inside. And that's what it was for the Nebraska men's basketball game the other day as well. Were you allowed to be extra physical on the perimeter, but it was kind of touch fouls inside? If you're Nebraska, you hope it is the exact opposite of that tonight. You hope you are allowed to be extra physical inside. Fine, let it be a little touchy on the outside. Let everyone run around, because hopefully then Bryce is drawing a bunch of fouls as well and getting to the free throw line. But what you cannot have without Berke Buchtengel in there is Andrew Morgan and or Braxton Mia in foul trouble early, to where you're going to have to go short and you're going to have Jawan Gary at the 5.
Right.
It is that seems like that's probably where you go with your small ball lineup, because Gavin Griffiths, I love him. I said all preseason, I was like, that is a dude who he can get the crowd going. You saw it in the non-conference. He takes a shot and the crowd gets a little energy. He's not big-bodied enough to go bang around inside with Derek Queen. He's just not that guy. Jawan Gary is only 6'6". That's living dangerously too. So the fouls are definitely one thing for Nebraska to watch, and the way this game is officiated early on. The other one, Nick, is if Nebraska can come out shooting well. They did last game, shot 51.2% in both halves. That's consistency. But what you also have seen the last few games is the other team coming out on fire. Can Nebraska stem that a little bit as well?
No doubt. And that was maybe the most encouraging thing on the road, to see Nebraska stay afloat with Washington, even when we were watching that game thinking, if Nebraska could just stymie this or just cut it off a little bit there in the end of the first half that they did.
7 for 7 from deep.
Yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous, but yet somehow they got them to come back down to right around 50%. I say come back down to around 50%. But the fact of the matter was Nebraska was right at 50, just a little bit above 50%. So they were steady right there. And you knew, as hot as Washington, we talked about this last week, they were completely bucking, they being Washington was completely bucking the trend of how they shot all year. So you knew the law of averages would kick in at some point in the game. Second half was the story where they were ice cold and Nebraska steadied. They were absolutely steady offensively. And then, yeah, as you point out, against Ohio State, you get a couple of haymakers right out of the gate from Ohio State, and Nebraska's able to weather that offensively. Bryce doing what Bryce has been doing, Jawan Gary doing what he's been doing. Those two are obviously key, even with Berke out. Whatever complementary scoring you can get around those two, but it is vital that you have those types of nights from those guys, Jawan Gary especially. And then the other thing that I think is going to be huge tonight, we talk about that size advantage, and you take a 6'10" guy out of the equation. You know, you still have Braxton, you still have Andrew Morgan, but if one of those guys is getting a spell, how is Nebraska going to still body up when it does come to defensive rebounding? Because that's the other thing that does worry me about this one. And it was a bit of a factor against Maryland out in College Park. And that was the second opportunities and extending possessions that Maryland was able to do. So, you look at just the simple math of it. You take one of those big guys out, and then if somebody else, I don't think Braxton Mia can play every minute of this game. I don't think Andrew Morgan can play every minute of this game. So when you're taking some of those guys out, how are you still going to negate what Maryland is going to throw at you, where they have two, at sometimes three guys that are going to be taller than anybody you have on the floor? So there's a lot of concerns just from I think from block to block in this game, from the paint in this game. And if Maryland is having some success shooting the three ball, that's where obviously you do worry about Nebraska being able to stay up to pace defensively, being able to have that type of energy at the end based on what I anticipate their guards having to do defensively, where they're going to be working inside and then trying to recover outside, much like we saw them do such a good job against Creighton. So it's a fascinating matchup. And I don't want to make it sound like I think Nebraska is going to lose this game. I just think, given the injury situation to Berke and the team you're playing with the type of size that they have, it presents a unique challenge. But what it also does is it gives Fred Hoiberg an opportunity to experiment a little bit with that small lineup, but also be very unpredictable. So, you got to use that to your advantage, because right now Maryland's thinking, okay, how the heck are they going to try to defend us? How are they going to come at us offensively as well? I just think there's a lot of things that Fred Hoiberg can do, especially with having not one, but 2 point guards, having some different guys. Jacobson, who could have a small role or eat up a couple of minutes here and there to just try to spell some guys. There's a lot of different things that, let's just face it, you don't have an abundance of film on that Nebraska might throw at Maryland. That could actually work to Nebraska's favor.
Right. And last time these two played, by the way, Derek Queen, who has been on an absolute tear of late, He has been dominating. He had 3 points.
Yep.
All of those at the free throw line. He goes 0 for 4. Nebraska actually out-rebounded Maryland 36-32, had one more offensive rebound in the game as well. Maryland shot 40% from deep. Nebraska just 6 of 16. Here is where, and this goes a little bit to your first point, here is where I think Nebraska makes its hay in this ball game tonight. And it's not on the defensive end, because you're just going to have to deal with what you got. You're going to have to figure that out. Here is where Nebraska wins this game, because it is not where they won the game last time. Last time, Maryland shot 12 free throws, made 7. Nebraska shot 11 free throws, made 6. Nebraska wins this game if they can shoot 20 free throws. If you can get Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary and Connor Esijan and Raleigh Wooster to the line, Nebraska wins this basketball game tonight. And you got to get to that 20 number. And Nebraska was doing that all through the non-con, and I realized you were way more athletic than your opponents.
Mm-hmm.
You were more athletic, you were bigger, you were stronger, all of those things. But for Nebraska to have success tonight, it's not going to be necessarily what happens on the defensive end. It's not going to be necessarily what happens from three-point land. It's going to be getting the guys to the free throw line and shooting them at a high percentage.
I think it's a great point. And I think it's definitely a factor because, again, going back to that game in College Park, Maryland, the lack of the Juwan Gary offensive presence was big. So yeah. How are you going to be creative? Okay, if the shots aren't falling early for Juwan Gary, the thing that I've liked lately, especially in that game against Illinois and even against Washington, is he became relentless. Zero hesitation inside. He was going right to the rim. And so if he wasn't seeing the ball fall in the cylinder, he was getting himself to the free throw line. That is something that I think is going to be a heavy emphasis. I think, to your point, somehow at least finishing possessions, if not with a made basket, getting to the free throw line. That's where I think Bryce Williams, and even in the game he had against Maryland, 16 points isn't bad, and you can survive on that. I look at the way that they shot the three ball. I still think Nebraska can survive on 6 made three-pointers based on how they've won games. But it is, if you're gonna have that low of a number, to your point, that free throw attempt number needs to be up. And I think that's where Bryce has taken his game to another level, is he is finishing at the rim. He is drawing the contact, but he's doing it under control. He's not just going up, wishing on a prayer, hoping that he'll get a call and just throwing it at the top of the backboard. He actually has purpose getting to the rim. And I think Juwan Gary has also seen that to be another facet of his game offensively, that can get him going if he's not seeing shots fall early on. So those two parts of it, I think, absolutely are spot on. And then the other thing, when you do look at, okay, is there going to be a complimentary score? Gosh, at home in a game where you do need some extra offensive opportunities, wouldn't this just be a signature ideal night for Connor Esijan to have one of his heaters? I just think that he could be the X factor in this. If he's at 40% or above beyond the arc, I think that's going to bode really, really well for Nebraska tonight.
In the latest bracketology from ESPN's Joe Lunardi, Nebraska part of the last 4 byes. So in the tournament, not headed to Dayton. Maryland, a 6 seed. So a chance, when you're looking at the way bracketology is looking at this, a chance to move up. Because that's kind of where things are right now. You can see all of the net ranking is garbage. Let's get that out of the way. But Ken Palm and a lot of these other metrics, there's a chance to move up. And when you're looking at where a lot of these places have their seed lines, there's a chance to move up. That's what this game is. And it is a ranked opponent, which means if Nebraska were to win, this would be a school record for wins over ranked opponents in a single season. Think about that, from where this team was on a 6-game losing streak to now this heater, and a chance to set a school record for a good thing, for a very good thing. That game, 7:30 tonight. Also want to mention women's basketball is actually kind of gone the other way. They've lost a few in a row. They are at number 17, Maryland. So kind of splitting the fan bases between College Park and Lincoln. But Nick, they've struggled a little bit in the first, trying to deal with the loss of Natalie Potts and then the loss of Allison Widener, and just not really having enough of that guard and wing play that you need in this Big Ten.
Well, and with the 5 games, it's crazy to think, too, they only have 5 games remaining before you get into conference play. You feel like this is where the men were not that long ago, where you're searching for answers. You're looking at your bench. There's, very little answers. And unlike the men, Amy Williams, her hands are tied a little bit because of what you mentioned with Potts and Widener not being available. So my whole feeling of this team, and right now I kind of look like a moron because they're going the other way with this, was as this team continued to play throughout the stretch of Big Ten games, that you were going to see them get a lot more used to the lineups that they have right now. And even, a freshman like Britt Prince, a lot of the game would begin to slow down a little bit. And she's had a couple of rough nights, which again, I don't think anybody should say, oh, well, maybe she's not as good as we thought. No, she's still a freshman. Okay. She's still going to have those moments, but it is that opportunity when you see these teams get into the Big Ten tournament, that how are you playing going into it? Because once you get into that tournament, it's matchup based. I mean, we all know that. And so for me, and when I think of when Nebraska made that exciting run losing to Iowa in the Big Ten championship the previous year, was the way that Nebraska went in, the confidence that they had, and really the confidence they had that if they had to go up against big bad Iowa, that they could take them down because they'd already beat them in the regular season. Exactly. They have that confidence. So with this team, and I think there's a similarity, there's a commonality with this, the men's team as well. The men's team, they're not overly gifted offensively, but what they're doing right now is they're making the most of those offensive possessions that they get. But the other thing, and this was the thing that Fred called them out, maybe not called him out, but this is one of the things that he saw a lot, was it wasn't a lack of effort with them, but it was the toughness when it came to the 50-50 balls. Now, what are we seeing Nebraska doing in that come from behind victory against Washington? In that game against Ohio State, more than anything, guys are on the floor. Guys are, they're going after the loose ball. They're winning the 50-50s. So there's a lot of the correction there, but those are little things where you don't have to be this overly gifted, talented team. And I think for the women's basketball team right now, one of the big issues, if you look at their most recent losses against Iowa, is they get out to such a big lead. One of your biggest advantages is being able to go inside to Alexis Markowski. Well, you have to kind of scrap that because you're chasing so many points and you're trying to get bigger possessions. That's where this team is really shorthanded. So I just think that from the confidence standpoint, much like the men, they got out of it. Now all of a sudden they're playing with confidence, even being down a player. I'm really curious to see how they react tonight. Same with the women. If they can just get that one win, much like Nebraska men were able to do against Illinois, and feed off of that, I think they still have a lot of runway to put themselves into that good headspace going into the Big Ten tournament.
Nebraska at Maryland, women's game 5:30. Nebraska men hosting Maryland 7:30, both on Big Ten Network tonight. You've got a doubleheader. So if the women's game runs long, we get to blame ourselves. And that's always what we do is, these games are never going to get over in time. We get to blame ourselves. So the Nebraska-Maryland doubleheader starting at 5:30, second game at 7:30 on Big Ten Network. Speaking of men and women, that is a big discussion within the way everything is happening with collegiate athletics going forward. July 1, revenue sharing comes to the NCAA and college athletics. $20.5 million is what schools will be allowed to share with their student athletes. How they do that is up to them. Now, in the waning hours of the Biden administration, I'm going to mention politics because this is how everything is being governed from the top. In the waning hours of the Biden administration, Title IX guidance said that your revenue sharing had to be equivalent between men and women. So out of that 20.5, 11 or 10.25 had to go to men, 10.25 had to go to women. Most universities had not been planning on that. I can tell you that. Because we have a graphic that we'll get to here in a minute. Trump administration has come in, and on top of potential other sweeping changes that are so difficult to get into that we can't until anything actually happens with the Department of Education, but they have rescinded that guidance, which means, one, there's going to be court cases. With the NCAA, there's always court cases, but it says that you do not have to revenue share based on Title IX. There's a lot there, Nick, on the way all of this is going and what this means for Nebraska athletics. You, as somebody who has, one, covered collegiate athletics for quite a while and also been in the game calling it, which you will do with the Husker Radio Network, How difficult is all of this to follow for not just the everyday person, but for us as we're in it and it's already difficult to follow?
Absolutely, because the goalposts keep getting moved on this thing too, where I know the one question we all had when we knew about this settlement that will finalize on April 7th is when we'll have the actual final ruling on this thing. But it's coming, and everybody's prepared for it to be coming. Is our initial question was, well, how does this impact Title IX? What is this going to look like? And nobody ever really had a clear answer. You mentioned the 10.5, and that's what it sounded like. Okay, I guess that would be how you would go about it. But you're right. Nobody was planning on doing that. 75% of that revenue share, by all accounts, was going to go to football. And then you were going to probably look at men's basketball to prioritize as well because of the revenue that it brings in with the NCAA tournament. Now, what we are all of a sudden seeing when it comes to, okay, wait, let's back it up just a little bit here, is look at what the women's basketball tournament did last year. When they started promoting it. And yes, it helped that you had players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and you have superstars, but hey, you still have Juju Watkins. You still have some very exciting players.
Paige Beckers.
Absolutely. And you've got coaching personalities as well that are being that those personalities and these teams are being promoted a lot more. You're seeing a lot more endorsements with them. You're seeing them a lot more mainstream when it comes to the women's college basketball side of it. We know here locally, the Nebraska volleyball is on a Candace Parker, Patrick Mahomes, Dick's Sporting Goods commercial too. So we know that there has been a much better effort here recently than there has been ever when it comes to promoting women's sports and being able to showcase that, the TV deals that can help that. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like all of a sudden tomorrow we can say, hey, women's basketball deserves to get the same as college football. Okay, there is still a lot of ground to cover. So then you start thinking, okay, now look at the individual markets, look at the individual schools. And this is where I say Nebraska itself, I think, is in a pretty good spot compared to other schools when it comes to women's athletics. Mention volleyball, and that goes without saying. That is the biggest thing going next to football. And the success, as we know, has been better than Nebraska football. But also women's basketball, I think you see those games in Lincoln too. They get good attendance. When there is a call to action of, hey, fans, we need you to come out and pack Pinnacle Bank Arena, they pretty much do it. And, the NIL packages between 1890 and local businesses that want to get involved, not just with student athletes, but also, more importantly, women's student athletes. We saw what Ron Yates and Nebraska Crossing did for women's volleyball too. There is, I think, a very unique offering that is coming throughout the surrounding businesses and the state of Nebraska when it comes to supporting female athletics. So I think Nebraska, and there's probably other programs, other schools out there that have something similar that I think are going to continue to drive this. But you brought up something that I think is going to be also very interesting. All these things are seeing court cases. And we know that a lot of the courts are favoring the student athletes. When it comes to Title IX, will that continue? Will they continue to favor the student athletes? And in this case, being the female student athletes, because you know it and I know it. These things are going to be contested. If the revenue share is 80% of it going to male athletes, this will be contested. How will the courts rule? Because they'll always rule in favor of the student athletes. That's what I've learned from this. The NCAA, sorry, your days when it comes to that are done. But if it comes down to, are we ruling in favor of the male student athlete or the female student athlete? That, to me, Kaleb, is going to be very, very interesting and very uncomfortable to watch.
Well, yeah, because one of the ways schools showed that they were within compliance when it comes to Title IX was the way that they gave out athletic scholarships. That's the reason that you go to an athletic website, Nebraska's included, and you see, well, why are there more women's sports than there are men? Because the men have football. Because there's a football program.
A lot of scholarships there.
85 scholarships. And now that's going to go up to, if you fully fund it, 105. So there's already going to be differences in the way you lay out an athletic department because of the roster sizes and the unlimited scholarships up to that roster size now. Volleyball going up to, 18?
Yep.
Like in baseball, baseball with what was it, like 11.7 or 12.1 scholarships, whatever it was, for a team where if you were to fully fund 11 guys, you can't play a baseball season with that.
No, you had a 35-man roster. So what do you do with the other half of the team?
Same thing goes to softball. Same thing goes to track and field, soccer. The only ones that were fully funded if you were on scholarship: football, women's basketball, men's basketball. Right? I think that was it. Maybe volleyball, but yeah, it was. You have not been fully on scholarship just because you were on scholarship. You didn't have everything paid for. Right. That part is going to be up to the schools. How much of that scholarship do they change? There are some Southern schools saying they are going to fully fund their baseball programs. I'm going to be interested to see how much that changes the lay of the land. I know the Southern schools have tended to dominate what is college baseball. But Nick, when we look at what does that percentage look like? And before the Biden Department of Education guidance had come out, Texas Tech, this is what Texas Tech's looked like, as what they were going to do. And 74% of that, or about $15.2 million, was going to go to football. And then you start to look at the mouths to feed.
Yep.
Men's basketball next, then volleyball. That was a surprise for me looking at Texas Tech, to then go about between 4 and 5% going to volleyball, and then splitting it up between women's basketball and baseball. For Nebraska, you have to imagine volleyball is going to be at least the 1.5 to 2 million, and that starts to cut into your overall percentage. And there are going to be some people that say, give it all to football and get the football program back on track. But like you mentioned, and like we have seen here, you had the women's basketball tournament last year. Go off in the ratings, go off in the revenue generated.
Higher viewership in the national championship than the men's national championship. That to me is that's not nothing right there.
You've seen what it looks like for Nebraska volleyball here to 92,003 at Memorial Stadium. It wasn't just an event. It was a celebration because those people keep showing up. You're going to be in Pinnacle Bank Arena for the first couple matches this fall. If you fund it, if you support it, these things have a chance to grow. So I think you're going to have schools come up to that decision of, where is that line for still funding something that is really blossoming, is really sitting there with the potential to grow. And we are really fortunate where we live, Nick, because we get to see what it looks like for Husker volleyball. We get to see just across state lines what it has looked like for Hawkeye women's basketball and all of the growth that they've helped do for the women's game there. We are very fortunate where we are. Not every part of the country does this. So when you look at like Texas Tech and you look at, okay, where do you move some of those numbers? Well, you're probably going to have to drop, like if we were just working off these numbers, you got to increase women's volleyball for sure.
Yep.
You might have to decrease football and men's basketball to increase what you get to women's basketball, baseball, and probably have to send something over to softball because Rhonda Rebels had a hell of a program.
Yep.
And they've look like they have a big year coming up. But then you start to really think about it, and the bowling program at Nebraska, I know it's not a lot of money, but they've had as much success as anyone.
Sure.
Men's gymnastics has had as much success as anyone historically with national championships, getting to the Final Four or whatever it's called now, getting to the finals at nationals. Men's track and field has more Big Ten championships than anyone else on campus.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mouths to feed if you start looking at where do you throw a little bit of money, and then at that point, is it even worth it if it's, okay, here's $200,000 to a track program with 80 guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other thing that's interesting, just looking at those numbers. The first thing that stands out, we're talking about Texas Tech. It continues to show you, if you're looking at 4.1 to 5.1% of the piece of that pie going to volleyball, how rapidly that sport is growing. We spent a lot of time just talking about women's basketball in that game and how it has really grown, and they've done a good job of promoting the product but volleyball is, I think, maybe the quickest riser out of all of women's sports right now. And Nebraska is in the center of that, which is a great place to be. You're right about softball too, because women's College World Series numbers have been very, very good. And we've seen once you get into regionals and super regionals, there's a lot of eyeballs on that product as well. So I think softball is on the come. I don't think as fast as volleyball and women's basketball, but it's definitely there on the come, especially when you get there at the end of the year out there in Oklahoma City. It's just how much are these conferences and their networks, their television networks, putting into the television product of promoting those sports from a conference standpoint, I think is also a big part of this. But here's the other thing, and I want to go back to the courts for a second, Caleb. At what point will the Department of Justice, I never thought we would be talking about the Department of Justice, the old presidential administration, the new presidential administration.
They're going to play a big part in all of this.
Yes,
it's
yes,
not necessarily who is sitting in the White House, and that will play a part, because then that moves the train down the track. But all of the different parts of government, you're seeing it at state legislatures on deciding on what they're doing with name, image, likeness, on whether or not that money is exempt from income tax. You're going to see what happens out of Congress, and of course, like you're talking about, what comes up in the courts, and a lot of this is going to get to the Supreme Court.
It is, and here's the one area that I don't know if it's getting as much conversation as I think eventually it will, as we're trying to do this exercise, Caleb, and that is, at what point will the Department of Justice say capping the revenue share is going to be not in line with antitrust, is going to all of a sudden go back to the courts and saying, why do we need to put a cap on this? If you have enough support locally in your respective universities and people are still donating, and you can afford, between the TV revenue that you are getting and all of the donations that are coming in, and your collective now in-house and working together, and you can afford more than that, and so you can give either football more, or you can divvy it up to some of the other sports that maybe aren't getting as high of a percentage. Now you can give them a little bit more because you have willing donors. At what point will we say, you know what, you can't put a cap on this because that's not within the antitrust? That's a violation. NCAA has had to battle this. This is why we are where we are right now, because the NCAA kept a blind eye. They were so archaic when it came to this. Now, did I ever think we would be in this position? No, but I think we've gotten to this position because they turned their back on this growing problem that is now just erupted into essentially free agency, and essentially is turned into pro sports. That's why we are here. So I would keep my eye on this cap at $20.5 or $21 million per university, where all of a sudden that cap might be blown up.
And I'm curious if that cap will, simply because you can still do those third-party deals. You can still go to 1890. So you'll have your 20.5, and Nebraska can decide however they distribute that. But on top of that, you can still do your third-party deals where your donors can send stuff to 1890, and 1890 can help them with name, image, likeness stuff. You can still have people do stuff with the heating and air conditioning if they are the coldest Crawford, if they are the polar bear, like they can still do these things. You can still have Bergen Riley do stuff with Red Bull. Like those types of things will still exist. I'm curious where those arguments would come in court. And we are a long way. The only reason we bring this up is because there was the new guidance. And they're also looking at instituting someone to be in charge of the way NIL operates from the NCAA.
They need that badly.
And also a reporting system, a clearinghouse, essentially. If you have any NIL deal over $600, that you have to report that, and to make sure that it's on the up and up. It's not pay for play. You're actually doing something that the way name, image, likeness was intended, the way I would have liked it to be at least utilized when I was a collegiate athlete, because no one was going to pay me just to throw far. I wasn't throwing that far. All right. But yeah, Nate, this will be something a lot will change between now and April. We'll get to that court date in April, and a lot will change between then and July 1. And I'm sure at some point in there, Nebraska will release the way they are intending to divvy up this money, but a lot to change between now and then. Hey, I'm actually going to throw you a curveball right now, Nick, because we'll get to baseball. We'll get to baseball. There's a lot to get to baseball. But it was just announced today officially, because there was the Board of Regents vote last week. It was just announced officially today that Nebraska Athletics partnering with Aramark Sports Plus Entertainment for game day concessions. There's going to be facility improvements, alcohol sales, and as part of the release, they're expected to keep local fan favorites. And this is at Memorial Stadium, Devaney Sports Center, and other university-operated athletic venues. So that's not Pinnacle Bank Arena, and that's not Haymarket Park.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the places that have already had alcohol. Those are the places that have already had kind of the bigger concessions operations, because they're partnerships with what you have at Haymarket Park and the Salt Dogs ownership and what you have at Pinnacle Bank Arena in the city. There's always those conversations. But Nick, when you look at this and upgrades at Memorial Stadium, so there's supposed to be more offerings and it's supposed to move quicker. And I think things did move quicker when you went to cashless concessions.
Yep.
I think a lot of people agree with that. You also saw a lot more money generated that way. And now potentially, and no, I won't even say potentially, this will happen, is that there will be alcohol sales there and at the Devaney Center for volleyball, track and field, wrestling, gymnastics. I don't know if they'll have alcohol at swimming and diving, but hey, whatever gets you in there.
Why not?
I definitely want it at bowling. Bowling feels like one that we should all have pizza anyway.
I need a pitcher of beer during bowling. Whether if I'm watching it or if I'm actually bowling, I got to have a pitcher of beer and some wings.
I think I've joked with some people that I don't smoke, but that feels like one, even if we're there as media, like we need a pizza in just like a smoking section.
Just a heater dangling from our lips. We're not even actually smoking, but you just got to have a heater there. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, there's a lot of changes coming to what does game day concessions feel like for Husker fans in 2025. What are your thoughts?
It's modern and I love it. I went to a couple of the baseball games last year when they just introduced the beer options at Haymarket Park, and a lot of us had already been treated to that when we would go to a Salt Dog game. So that to me was very seamless. I just think that this is a modern way of doing business. This is a revenue stream that everybody else in college athletics is taking advantage of. And we just spent 10 minutes talking about how you increase your revenue, how you stay in good financial standing so you can support your student athletes. This is one of those areas where, as much as Nebraska has been so ahead of everything that's come with NIL, and I'm very confident with revenue sharing that they have a solid plan. This is the one area that they've been behind on, and we know why. We know that the local politics behind it, on why they didn't want to do it. It wasn't that Nebraska couldn't do it. It was the resistance from the generations of fan bases, and of course Tom Osborne and some of his wishes. And so you're trying to make both sides as happy as you can. I think we finally got to that point of, you're missing out on so much money by not doing this. So that modern element to a stadium that's just isn't modern, I think is going to give it a little bit of that feel. You mentioned the cashless option now that Nebraska provides, or I should say just going cashless, period. That was one of those things where everyone was curious about the entire wireless system, and if that was just going to come crumbling down and no one was going to be able to get alcohol, or get their concessions. But hey, it all worked out, and you're right. It moves things along a lot quicker. There's so much about this to me over the last couple of years that had made sense. In Aramark, look, I don't know about you. Anytime I've gone to Kauffman Stadium, Aramark was always one of those staples. You remember always seeing, if you'd get the program, there was always the big Aramark ad with a guy eating a huge hot dog and everything. But the fact that they can also help with the infrastructure too, that you can work with them on, well, we don't just have to have beer troughs. You can actually build an infrastructure where you can put in lines, you can have taps. I think it's great, because the one thing I do know about Nebraska is, and it was good to hear that they're still going to have a lot of the local fanfares, but when it comes to beverages and it comes to alcoholic beverages too, I think there is a tremendous local flavor when it comes to craft beer. And I think being able to institute, like we've seen at the baseball games too, where you have a lot of local options, I think that's great, because the one thing that we know, okay, if they're going to finally, you avoid the resistance of, we don't want to have alcohol, we never have. Now that you have it, the one thing we know that the Nebraska fan base, no matter what generation you're in, they will support the local product too. So I think this is a huge win for a lot of those local breweries as well that will have a place in Memorial Stadium and at the Bob Devaney Sports Center. All of those things to me, I think are a huge win. We knew it was coming. It's just great to see that it's finalized. And now you get an idea of how it might look going forward for Nebraska athletics.
Yeah, we're going to have to, they said local fan favorite, so we're going to have to see what that means specifically for Valentino's, for Runza, and for Fairbury hot dogs. We're going to have to see what those look like, because likely Aramark is going to have to work out a deal with each of them, as opposed to you're already major sponsors with the university. So come out here and fire the hot dog gun, do the Derviner Schlinger, all of those things. Real quick, before we get to Michael Bruntz and Husker247, you got to chat with Will Bolt, and season is starting tomorrow. What were just your impressions of Will Bolt and his feelings going into the season as everything gets underway, like it does every year outside of Lincoln?
I think they're embracing the ceiling. I think there's that cool confidence that Will has. I just think that, gosh, you almost go back to the 2021 season when they were in the pod system and they won the Big Ten because those were the only games that they could play. There was a good mix of veterans, super seniors, but also some exciting young talent, Bryce and Max, to name a few there too. This is but between 21 and this year, there was a lot of influx with that roster. There was a lot of guys coming in that had college baseball experience, but hadn't necessarily played with one another. And I think this is the year where you had so many guys come back, where very similar again. You've got some exciting young players that could impact right away, but also this veteran group, this core group, where you're going to be using these next couple of weekends to find out where you're going to put these guys, because you have so many options and only 9 spots to put on a lineup card right now. So I think that they're excited about how it's all going to work out. But I know that Will, more than anything, is extremely happy with the way everyone has embraced that culture. He spoke at the press conference, and I thought this was just a great example of that. Of Jalen Worthley is a guy that has starter stuff, and he's evolved into that, where he could probably go out, get the ball right away, give you 6 innings, and he's going to be pretty special. I'm sure he and Drew Christo want that role, and they could have that role at some point, barring injuries or anything like that were to take place. You hope that isn't the case. But these guys also have now seen where those roles that they have in long relief in the bullpen have been so impactful and have so much place for the success that this team hopes that they have, that I think for them to embrace that and say, hey, I know that that's something that is going to be a big part of this staff. Because if you're thinking about this, the external expectations and internal expectations of this team, the one thing about fulfilling those expectations that I could say on day one that is going to get them there, that at least right now they're closest to getting there, is that staff. Is from their rotation to the bullpen to a potential Luke Broderick as closer. That to me puts them there. So I think Will, more than anything, is extremely comfortable with how everybody's embraced that culture and has really embraced the roles that they are at least forecasted to have going into this weekend.
External expectations, preseason number 2 in the Big Ten Conference, 4 games over the next 4 days in Arizona. It's beginning tomorrow, UC Irvine, then number 16 Vanderbilt, San Diego State, and Grand Canyon. And a man who knows a little bit about every one of those teams is Michael Bruntz, Husker247. Bruntsy, nice to have you on Husker Max today. How's it going?
Not bad. How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me.
Oh, straight to the A's hat as we get into baseball talk.
I missed the memo. I didn't have the Nebraska hat. You guys didn't clue me in on the text message, I guess. I feel like an idiot.
We've done 4 shows together, and we're already coordinating what we're wearing, so it happens quick around here.
Brunsy, that's your brand too. The green and gold, man. That is your brand. So you got to roll with that.
That's true.
We got to hear from Will Bolt and a couple of players earlier this week. Bruntz, as you're looking at this team going into the season, what are just your thoughts on their confident level and where they fit into this expanded Big Ten, not to 18, just to 17 teams?
Yeah, I thought Nick, handled it pretty well there. I mean, I think it's a confident team. It's a veteran team. basically the entire lineup from last year's back, minus Josh Karen and Cole Evans. And, I think that's a good place to start. I mean, I don't envy Will Bolt having to write a lineup card every day. You basically have 5 outfielders that could comfortably play for you at any moment. Across the infield, it's the same guys as last year. You've got Case Sanderson, who I think probably not enough people are talking about coming into the season. And, the pitching staff, you're going to have guys in new roles, but I think at least now, as we sit here in February 13th, that there's appears to be on paper more depth than what they've had and more quality depth than what they've had the last few years. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, they've scheduled aggressively, and I think that sometimes when you do that, that's a bit of a reflection of what you think about your team. And you would probably not go running into this schedule if you do not have a veteran group returning and guys that you can count on right away when the season gets rolling.
Bruntz, I was asked this question last night, and I want to get your answer on it as well. Out of the arms that you will see, whether it's rotation, bullpen, closer, who are you looking forward to seeing the most this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, of the guys that we've kind of gotten to see, I want to see what Tyner Horn as a sophomore looks like. I saw him throw in the Red-White series, and he looked like a completely different pitcher than what we saw last spring. The fastball's playing up. It's low to mid 90s consistently. You got to remember, this is a kid that did not give up an earned run as a senior in high school. He had a 0.00 ERA, and he got hit around last year. And I think there's probably an adjustment period that he had to go through. And, he's in that Saturday role. I think he's probably got Friday stuff if they needed to go that route. But, he's a big piece, and his development's a big piece of kind of, solidifying that weekend rotation. Beyond that, I mean, you're going to see some new arms as well. Carson Yasa is going to throw this weekend, 6'7", 235 with a mid-90s fastball. That's not bad. And there's been some chatter that guys like Grant Clevenger, who wasn't really a factor last year, is going to be potentially a high leverage left-handed arm out of the bullpen. So they've got some options there, and that's kind of exciting. I mean, I think when you have guys with plus stuff, I mean, that's going to be what will allow Nebraska to really be competitive these first 3 weekends.
When you talk about the confidence coming into this season, and last year, it didn't result in hosting a regional or getting out of a regional, but the run that this team went on in Omaha in the Big Ten tournament and getting contributions from all kinds of different arms, from all kinds of different bats as well. Bringing that into this season, Bruntz, when you look at it, who's kind of maybe that underdog confident guy that if their backs are against it, Nebraska might turn to this guy, whether it's on the mound or a bat, to get in there and get it done?
Well, I mean, I think on the mound, I think that they're the two guys that are kind of the glue for this staff. I think it's Drew Christo, and I think it's Jalen Worthley. Mm-hmm. Nick's right that Worthley's got the type of ability where he could go in and start on the weekend right now if Nebraska needed him to. But in college baseball, the guys that are like gold are the guys that are high leverage type pitchers who can come in tough situations, or they can give you multiple innings across a relief appearance. Those guys are huge, and that's what they're going to ask of Christo and Worthley. Worthley especially, I think they're going to try to get multiple appearances out of him on a weekend if they can. And so I think that's the backbone of your staff right there, and guys that if you're going to be running deep into Big Ten tournament or deep into the NCAA tournament, those are the guys that have to click for you. So I think that's who I look at. I also think, lineup wise, it's hard to pick one. I mean, you've got obviously Gabe Swanson last year and the heater that he was on, if he can kind of, put it together over a full year, that lineup looks completely different. But, for me there, I would go with Caden Brumbaugh. I mean, I think he's going to be your leadoff guy. He had the shoulder issues last year, which he's past now, knock on wood there. But, he's a spark plug at the top of that lineup. And if he can get on base, they've got a lot of bats in that lineup that can come in and drive in runs. So I think he's going to be an important piece at second base. And I kind of look at those types of guys that are going to be really key for this team.
Bruntz, if I were to tell you that Dylan Carey finishes with a Bryce Matthews type of season, maybe not the stolen bases necessarily, but is a 20-plus home run guy in 2025, you would think what?
He figured out how to hit a curveball, a breaking pitch. And I mean, that's the key for him, right? Like he punishes fastballs and his big bugaboo has been handling breaking pitches. And they've got him doing some different stuff now. He's timing up things a little bit differently, doing a toe tap, which, you got to love the toe tap. And, the thing that's important with him, I mean, I think is just kind of keeping him right mentally. I think he's a kid that, when things go well, he does well. I think he gets hard on himself a little bit when things don't. And he hit 300 in the Cape last year. The power numbers haven't been there yet, but I mean, that's kind of the next piece for him is if he can start hitting for home runs. If you got, what did you say? Did you say 20 home runs? 20. If you got 20 home runs out of Dylan Carey, look out. That'd be a heck of a story. But I do think that he finally is at a place where there's less pressure on him too in the lineup. I feel like there's more depth there, so he doesn't have to be that kind of centerpiece in the lineup because it feels like years ago. I mean, he kind of came out of nowhere, was hitting leadoff for a while or cleanup, like that was ages ago. But he's a guy that could definitely give Nebraska a little bit more if he gets on a tear.
Softball opened their season last week with a couple of ranked opponents, ended up going 3-2. Nebraska gets a ranked opponent on game 2 of the weekend, taking on number 16 Vanderbilt. Nebraska ranked themselves. What are you looking for most for this team in this opening weekend of technically 4 games, even though 3 of them are in that MLB Desert Invitational?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking for competitiveness across the board. I mean, it's going to be, you're facing 3 really good teams right out of the gates, 3 teams that have been playing outside for a number of weeks. And, you want to see the guys that you can count on. I mean, I think Nebraska, as much as they kind of get an idea in practices of how this kind of could look, you don't really know until you get the lights on and you're in tight games. I mean, Darren Erstad always told that story about Chad Linsman, where that they go out and check on him because they think he hurt his arm because the velocity had dropped so much and he was just nervous. That happens the first couple of weekends of a season. So you hope Nebraska's past that. You want to see kind of similar to what they did last year. I mean, they faced a really good lineup of teams right out of the gates last year and were really competitive. And I think kind of gained some confidence out of that. So I think that's more what you're looking to see. And certainly, it's an aggressive schedule this year. That's been well documented. But if you're able to get some of these early season wins, I mean, these are the types of games that when you get to April and May are still going to be sticking with you and looking pretty good on that resume. So it's, challenging, but also there's a ton of opportunity there.
I did want to ask you about 2 guys in particular when we think about newcomers, but do have some college baseball games and some successful games under the belt too. And what Hogan Heligzo will be replacing with Josh Caron, the former Creighton catcher, but also Cale Frost, the reigning Summit League MVP, Summit League Player of the Year. What you expect given the different competition that both of these guys are going to be facing?
Yeah, Hogan's going to be a really important piece of this because, you're replacing Caron. You're not expecting him to be Josh Caron at the plate. That's not what he's going to be. But you want somebody that can manage a pitching staff, that can play good defense, that can just be dependable. I mean, I think when you kind of look at what Nebraska has at catcher, you had a couple guys behind Hogan Calixto have off-season surgery that are kind of still coming back from that. Like Will Jeske might be an option at catcher. He's a guy that, for whatever reason, the guy just is able to put the ball in play when he has to, which I think that's helpful. But you're just going to need Hogan Calixto to really kind of just manage that staff. And, Cale Frost, he's hit at every level. We saw him last year play at Nebraska. The 21 home runs that catches your attention. 59 or 60 RBIs, something like that. Mm-hmm. The one good thing is I don't know that there's a ton of pressure on him because you could have some nights where he's the DH. You could have some nights where Butenbach's in right field. Yeah. They can move guys around a little bit, and the lineup this year will have more power from the left side, more so than they've had in the last 5-6 years. So he's a big piece of that, and they just kind of need him to play his game. I mean, I don't know that they really need him to do much of what he hasn't already done. He just needs to do it at a higher level.
I want to get your thoughts real quick. Big picture. Nebraska hasn't been out of a regional in 20 years now. And for Will Bolt, he's got a conference regular season championship. He's got a conference tournament championship, a couple of regional appearances. How big of a year is this for Will Bolt and what he's been building here in Lincoln?
Yeah, I mean, it's big. I mean, I think, you have the makings of a roster where, you're certainly going to be in that regional conversation. They've been in the hosting conversation, 2 of the llast 4 years. I mean, They've been kind of on the doorstep, and it's a difference of 3 or 4 games.
Rutgers.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the potential's there. I mean, I think you're always going to be challenged a little bit, just being in the Big Ten. Maybe, with the addition of Oregon, you're not going to have the RPI suck that some of the league has been in the past. So we'll see. You need USC and UCLA to kind of pick up from where they've been the last few years. So to kind of lift the league, but this is a roster that they've been able to keep together. They didn't have a lot of defections. They added a couple good pieces to it. And I think you are able to build on what you did in year one under Rob Childress last year. So it's, the potential's there. I think that's what you can say. I mean, in the big picture, should they be hosting? I don't know. That's a really, really tough road for a Northern team to do. That's the goal. We'll see if they can do it. But that this feels like a team that has fewer question marks. I heard Nick say kind of similar to 21 in some ways in that group. I definitely think there's some similarities there.
But imagine this, they are hosting, and at that time in the softball calendar, it would be super regionals. Nebraska softball hosting a super regional at the same weekend. Nebraska baseball hosting a regional for the first time in forever. That's going to be fun for Lincoln.
You would take that problem, I think.
The local economy would really like that.
I saw Jameel Weeks get mentioned on Twitter the other day, and I was thinking back to that 06 regional where Nebraska didn't even get to play Miami. So maybe we need baseball in May and June again in Lincoln. That'd be okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Michael Bruntz, Husker247. Appreciate all the info. We'll talk probably a few more times as the season rolls on.
Sounds good, guys. Have a good one.
See you, Bruntz.
There you go. All right. So, I'm ready for baseball. I know you're ready for baseball. Take me through what the weekend looks like for you with a little bit of an Arizona trip.
Oh, so we'll arrive late afternoon Arizona time. So a chance to watch some hoops tonight. I'm sure Ben, myself, probably Jared will get together, watch a little basketball, and then usually that first night it's in bed early, a little final prep work.
Nervous for opening day type of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I hope to wake up in the morning, get a little bit of a run in, and then a little bit of an earlier start for tomorrow. And then what's kind of nice, we got the whole evening and really a lot of Saturday. I think we're going to try to golf on Saturday as well. So before we have the big Vanderbilt game too. So especially with the snow happening yesterday. This feels like a very appropriate time to get out to the Valley of the Sun. But I'm obviously looking forward to being back in the booth with not only Ben, who is a good friend, but also David Gustafson. But this team, I think there's a lot of reason not only for the internal optimism, but the external optimism about what this team can do too. And I'm just excited to see what it looks like here in these next few games and how Will's able to piece it together. But yeah, we always have a good time on the road. We do it responsibly, but we always make sure we have a good time. And since it's been 2 years since Ben and I have been on the road, so we'll do our best and not try to make up for lost time when it comes to the extracurriculars.
And I know there was, and you've echoed this a lot, but last year actually was when we found out of the cancer diagnosis for Greg Sharp, and then all of the magic that happened with finally putting the GS Strong on the Caps and getting a no-hitter immediately after that in the Big Ten tournament run. I'm sure you guys will mention Greg a couple of times, but we'll mention again right here, continuing to pray for Greg as he goes through this fight now into the spring.
Yeah, with all of the excitement and packing and getting ready to hop on the plane and get ready for the season, you're absolutely right that everything that we're doing from a routine standpoint and getting ready for the broadcast, getting ready for the season, all of it comes with all of our thoughts with Greg and obviously with his family and his daughter on the verge of getting married as well. There's so many things going on that we'll be doing the broadcast with a heavy heart, and we're thinking of him. We're hoping that we always used to do this before, where we would have a conversation. If Greg wasn't with us on the broadcast, immediately after the first game, we'd get into our rental car and we would call Greg and we would just talk about the game, whether it was a good outcome or a bad outcome. So we're hoping to continue tradition and be able to talk to our good friend about every moment of this weekend.
Well, hey, Nick, you have some safe travels, and I'm hoping we come back with 3-4 wins out of Arizona. So looking forward to seeing how that goes and listening to you guys. Safe travels, buddy.
Appreciate it.
That's Nick Handley. I'm Kaleb Henry. This has been Husker Max Today. We'll be back Monday, 9 a.m. right here on the Husker Max YouTube page. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow on all of your favorite podcast platforms and here on the Husker Max YouTube channel. Go big.